Hey, everybody. So we want to thank you for being a one-on-one facilitator for the 2020 Virtual Justice Ministry Conference. Your leadership and you taking on this role is so important to your organization, to your development as a leader in your organization and your congregation, and also to the DART network. We really appreciate you taking your time and your energy and your expertise to be a facilitator. You are going to train other leaders like yourself around the country to do one-on-ones, which are an important foundational part of building power for justice. So I want to go over the facilitator instructions with you, but before I do that, I am Leah Wiley with DART, and I'll have everybody else who's on here with me introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Sarah Storr with DART as well.
And I'm Marjorie Thigpen Carter with Justice Knox.
All right, so I'm going to go over the facilitator instructions. You should get a copy of this email to you if you have not already. Ask your organizer for it. Let me pull it up on the screen so you'll see what I'm going to go over, what I'm with you today. So these are the facilitator instructions for you to read over as a facilitator of a one-on-one group. These one-to-ones are going to take place on the second day of the Justice Ministry Conference. So that is Wednesday, July the 15th at 2:30 p.m. and will go until about 5:30 p.m. The purpose of the one-on-one group is for you to guide leaders in the skill of uncovering other self-interests and values by asking follow-up questions, eliciting stories, and briefly sharing of yourself. So this is the first page of the instructions. What I want to go over next is page 4, so that you will understand your role during these groups. So I'm going to read over the first 3 paragraphs. As a facilitator, your main job is to help leaders ask their partner why-type questions. Too often we accept surface-level answers from people during one-on-ones and don't dig deep enough into motivations and decisions of others, especially if it's something we think we already know, we perceive may be too personal, or may bring up a lot of emotion. But in past DART trainings, facilitators have asked people after a one-to-one if they would have minded talking more about a potentially sensitive subject, and they said, no, I would have liked to have talked more about that. So what you want as a facilitator, you want to hear leaders in your group ask follow-up questions like, why did you choose that career? Or why don't you spend more time doing what you say is most important to you? So asking why-type questions. Now, if the leader conducting the one-to-one is not asking why-type questions, interrupt to guide the conversation. And that is the big purpose of this training today, is to help you see and understand why you should and how to interrupt a one-to-one. You are going to help guide these one-to-ones. And so this last sentence that I read says, interrupt early to set the tone that you will be interactively assisting each practice. Okay, so that's what's on page 4. And let me go back to the instructions and kind of laying out what's going to happen in your one-to-one group. First of all, your preparation checklist is to study the skill of interrupting by watching this video all the way through. And then you're also going to read this entire packet that I'm going through with you right now. You're going to read this entire packet at least twice before the conference. And I would need your commitment that you will please do that, because it's so important that you have a handle on what this practice group looks like, that you're able to imagine it before you lead it at the conference. So please read through this packet at least twice before the conference. And I will also say that if you have any questions as you read through this packet, if you have any questions at all, please ask your organizer before the conference. Please don't come to the conference with questions because there won't be any time to really fess out those questions. Please ask any question you have. No question is a stupid question. Ask your organizer questions before the conference. So you'll see the timing here of your practice group. Begin with opening instructions for the practice group. You have about 10 minutes for that. Each practice is timed for 30 minutes total. That means each leader gets 20 minutes to conduct the one-to-one, and then 10 minutes for you to lead the group in an evaluation. And so again, the timing is here. The first leader will do their first 30 minutes, and the second leader will take a 10-minute break. Third leader, fourth leader, then you'll take 10 minutes to evaluate and dismiss for the day. And then right after you finish with your group, your 4 one-to-ones, then you're going to attend the staff evaluation, meaning that you will just stay on Zoom, stay there with us so that we can evaluate the one-to-ones. And I'll show you what that means in just a second. So your opening instructions: introduce yourself, and then go around to each person, ask for their name, organization, and city, number of years they've been active in the Justice Ministry organization, and let them know that you are the facilitator and the timekeeper. You are the facilitator and the timekeeper. And you're going to clarify the goal of your one-to-one today is not to find out all of your partner's self-interest, but to explore the line of questions that's most effective at uncovering one or a few self-interests and the stories behind them, right? So you want stories because that will point to self-interest and values. During your one-to-one today, practice the art of being curious. You will also clarify to your group, do not begin any one-to-one with, so tell me a little about yourself, right? Do not start with that. Let them know not to start with that because that's too open-ended or the like. Instead, ask a focus question such as, what or who got you involved in justice ministry? Or where are you from and what was it like to grow up there? Ask a specific question, so instruct them on that. On page 53 in their workbooks, you're going to review the one-on-one practice group sheet with them. That will give them an idea of what's going to happen in the practice group. And then tell the group, before you get started, during this introductory period, tell the group that you will interrupt each one-to-one to make suggestions for improvement. So for example, you might say something like, think of me as your coach. You're in a scrimmage practice today, so I may stop the play to ensure you're making the best moves, to seek clarity, or to offer a suggestion. So letting your group know that you're going to interrupt will help that process of you interrupting them and it not be so jarring. So from 2:40 until 4:50 will be the one-to-ones. Again, that's time for you on the first page. Ensure everybody leads a one-to-one and everybody is a part of a one-to-one. You will not participate in a one-to-one facilitator. There's some instructions there on the evaluations. Make sure you look at page 54 in your workbook to understand the note-taking sheet that you're going to guide people through during the evaluation. Your leaders should write on their evaluation sheet in their workbook and take notes on self-interest, because those self-interests and those notes are going to be used the next day for round 2 of your one-to-one practice group. So make sure they have page 54 open during each evaluation. There's some closing instructions for 10 minutes. And again, you're going to come to the staff evaluation from 5 to 5:30. Now we've got some guidelines for you here for you to think about how each one-to-one went. So this gray sheet in your prep sheet that says for staff evaluation only, you'll be thinking about this during the staff evaluation at 5 o'clock. And so the skills assessment guide goes through good, fair, or needs work, and that's kind of how you're going to rate how the one-to-one went. Good is ask why type questions in appropriate places throughout the conversation. The person shared of themselves during the one-to-one and connected the sharing to the person's self-interest. And they made a connection. They uncovered some values and self-interest. That's a good one-to-one. A fair one-to-one means that early on in the conversation, they may have missed some opportunities to ask why type questions. So you had to do quite a bit of interrupting at the beginning, but then they started to get the hang of it. And there was a good bit of asking of why type questions and sharing and making a connection. And then the needs work assessment says that the person just kept getting stuck in the one-to-one and didn't really seem to grasp the concept of asking questions to elicit stories. They may not have been curious, right? So you're kind of just thinking about, they really weren't asking questions. They kind of stayed on a surface level and they didn't share of themselves or they didn't make a connection. So again, this piece is what you would be thinking about once you're in the staff evaluation, evaluating the leaders in your practice group. So I think that's it. So that's it for your instructions. And so what we're about to see now is a model practice group one-on-one. Sarah Storer is going to be you. She is going to be the facilitator of the practice group. And Marjorie is going to be the leader who is conducting the one-to-ones, meaning the leader asking the questions and kind of leading the conversation. And I'm going to be the person that Marjorie is trying to get to know. So what you really want to pay attention to during this model and who you want to pay attention to during this model is Sarah. And the skills that she uses in kind of jumping in, interrupting, kind of guiding Marjorie and getting the one-to-one back on track.
Okay, so let's start the model. So welcome to the practice groups. My name is Sarah Storer. I work for DART and have been involved with organizing for about 11 years now. Let's go around the circle and do introductions.
I'm Marjorie Thigpen Carter, and I have been with Justice Knox since September 2016.
Okay.
And I'm Leah Wiley. I've been with DART in some capacity for the past 15 years. I've been the training director for 8 years.
Okay, so what we're going to do today is we're going to practice our one-to-one skills. Your job is primarily to elicit self-interest from the person you're doing a one-to-one with and build a relationship with them. So I'm going to ask Marjorie to start us off by doing a one-to-one with Leah. And Marjorie, I'm going to interrupt your one-to-one, sort of like if I was a coach during a scrimmage, to redirect the play so that you can get the most out of this practice. So I have a timer and I'm going to set it for 20 minutes. And when you're comfortable, you can get started, okay?
Okay. Okay. Well, hey, Leah.
Hey.
Hey, I'm so excited because we've not really gotten a chance to sit down and talk before too much. And I mean, to get us started, just tell me a little bit about yourself.
Okay, so I'm going to stop us there real quick. That's a little bit too broad of a question to start the one-to-one with. Is there something else you could ask Leah that's a little bit more specific so we can try to understand a little bit more about her self-interest in doing this justice work?
I mean, I guess wondering maybe how she got started with DART.
That's a good question. Yeah, go ahead with that.
Okay. Leah, I don't know if I've ever asked you what got you interested in joining the DART organization?
Well, what got me interested specifically, I was recruited from out of grad school. I mean, I finished grad school. I was at the University of Florida in Gainesville. And it was the spring, meaning right before graduation, meaning that me and everybody else in my class were looking for jobs.
Right.
And I was applying to different places. I was getting my degree in documentary filmmaking. And so I'd applied to, you know, some PBS stations. I was trying to figure out how to apply to HBO and History Channel, but I'd also applied to AmeriCorps, and because I had in my mind that one of my first film projects I wanted to do was to go to different, you know, predominantly Black neighborhoods across the country and kind of live there and get to know the people and kind of learn about the history of the neighborhood, and help the people in the community make a documentary about their neighborhood, and so that they could spark, kind of uh, well, gentrification was like a big thing that was going on and really made me angry. So kind of sparking revitalization,
Right.
in the community, but the way that the people in the community want it to happen, and in a way that people wouldn't get pushed out of their homes. And so that was so I don't know how I made the connection between AmeriCorps and doing that, but I think just the idea of nonprofit work
Mm-hmm.
was in my mind. And so anyway, so I was applying. I was looking for what I was going to do next. And I was also the president of an on-campus organization, and we always got emails
Mm.
about job opportunities that we could send to our organization. And I got an email from DART, and I read it and I read it and I read it and I read it. And it was saying that you would work with congregations, you would work with, you know,
Right.
people in the community to get affordable housing and affordable health care. And they kind of listed some issues. And I was like, this is what I was talking about. Like, this is what I was really talking about. Is that like a career?
Mm-hmm.
That I'd never heard of community organizing before. So I went to the info session and, you know, heard about the world as it is and the world as it should be. And um, it just sounded like it was right up my alley. So,
Well, how did you get interested in the issues of like housing and gentrification? Like what
hmm,
how'd you even learn about that stuff?
I think, I don't know.
So I'm gonna break there
Oh,
just for just a second. I like the question, how did you get interested in issues like housing and gentrification? Is there a better way to ask that so you learn a little bit more about a story of why those things are important to Leah instead of how she learned about them, Marjorie?
Um, well, maybe why were you interested
Yeah,
instead of
I like
how?
that phrasing.
Okay.
I think that
Okay.
would be good.
Okay. Okay,
I'm
Leah.
not sure. Go ahead.
Well, why were you interested in the issues of gentrification and housing?
I'm not sure. I think it was just some buzzwords that was being used. You know, when I would listen to the news, and it would just really make me angry. I think I started learning about eminent domain and gentrification, and so, and it made me. I think it opened my eyes that, um, the government could just take people's land
Mm-hmm.
and stuff and just kind of move them out.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Did you take a
and
did you take a class about that? Like how did you I mean,
I didn't. I didn't.
okay.
No, it was just, I think it was just stories that I'd heard in the news. Nothing
Okay.
personal.
Okay. And so but it made you angry hearing about the government being able to take things from people?
Yeah, I was slowly just, I was slowly learning about actual injustices.
Okay.
And I don't know that I would have phrased it that way. I mean, I'd grown up, you know, my parents and grandparents and people in my community would talk about the civil rights movement. So that was legend in my mind, like
Mm.
something about those stories, something about knowing about the history of our people's struggle. Um, I took I took on those stories, and I felt like that was a part of what my career was going to be or who I was going to be. Um, so that was already kind of in me, but
Well,
I think as I learned about,
wait, can I ask you a question? That makes me so curious. Like, what kinds of stories did you hear about the civil rights movement, and like told by your parents?
yeah, my parents um, helped to do some organizing to get people on buses to go up to the March on Washington.
Hmm.
They didn't go themselves, but my dad said that he did some organizing when he was teaching at Guilford College
Hmm.
in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, to get some students some transportation up to Washington D.C. And then just Black History Month and King's birthday was just really big in my church.
Okay.
Like we took lots of time to celebrate Black history in my church, but also just in the Black community, many churches right across my city. ML King holiday was a big deal in in my community back in Jessup, and so being a part of the ML King choir every year was like a big deal. My brother and I would go to the rehearsals, throughout December and in January to be
Mm-hmm.
in the choir. So
Mm-hmm.
so just I think just my my Blackness and who I was,
Mm-hmm.
um, that was fostered within my family, but also in the community. So I had I think, a very strong sense of self
Mm-hmm.
and how important it was, our history in America, my family's history. My mom was a big historian for my family. Um,
Where's your family? So is your family? Where is Jessup? I don't even know where Jessup is. Is that
Jessup is in Southeast Georgia.
in Southeast
It's
Georgia?
yeah.
Your family from Southeast Georgia? Like, is that, had they like from there always?
Um,
Marjorie, what's your thought process with that question? What are you trying to find out about Leah through that question?
I don't know. I just always think people's family history is kind of cool. I was just wondering where she was, and she said her mom was a family historian. So I thought, maybe that would lead me to something interesting about.
Yeah, it
Uh,
could. It
yeah.
could. Is there another way to ask that? To try to get stories maybe about where she grew up or experiences she or her family had?
Um, I'm trying to think. I don't know. Um, maybe like, well, I really was curious where Jessup was. Like, I was trying to
Sure.
place that, and so, but I mean, I guess like,
So a
um,
follow-up question then, where's
yeah.
Jessica? And also,
I'm trying to think. Maybe um, did it if you're from Southeast Georgia, I can't. Did you say you were? Um, did your mom's growing up in Southeast Georgia have an effect on her wanting to be involved in the civil rights movement, or an effect on, did you hear stories about your mom's growing up in Southeast Georgia,
mhm, that could work.
something like that?
So go ahead and ask Leah that.
Okay, Leah. Well, did you just tell me that? So Jessup is in Southeast Georgia, and is your mom from, like, are your mom and dad from Southeast Georgia, like from that
Yeah,
area?
yes and no. So my mom is from Jessup. That's her
Okay.
hometown. My dad is
Okay.
from Pennsylvania.
Okay. And you said your mom is kind of the family historian. Like, did she tell stories about what it was like growing up in Jessup in Southeast Georgia?
She did. She told a lot of stories. I think what I mostly meant was that she kept like the family tree,
Okay.
because my family, the way my family developed was pretty. There was some innuendo with that,
What do you mean?
but
That's that's curious.
right. So my family is a Johnson family, um, and there were four four cities that the Johnson family was from. The original person that we kind of herald as the patriarch, I think that's the word, is Thomas Johnson Sr. So that's 4 generations back. So that's not very far back, but that's who we kind of trace ourselves back to. And Thomas Johnson Sr. had 4 families.
Oh, wow.
He worked on the railroad. Jessup is a railroad, was one railroad city. It was, it was developed around the railroad. And so now that was his main family. He was married to Fanny Pearl. He was married to Fanny Pearl.
Okay.
And so that's the part of the family that my mom is from and that I'm from.
Okay.
But he also had a.
So, sorry to interrupt again. So this is an example of sometimes when you're in a one-to-one, you can get down a rabbit hole and start talking about things that aren't exactly like about Leah's self-interest. So this might be a good place for you to sort of see if you can wrap up that conversation and maybe come back to something that she said earlier into the one-to-one that you would like to explore more. Was there anything that Leah mentioned earlier that you didn't ask any follow-up questions about that you're curious about?
Well, she said her mom told lots of stories about growing up, and I just wondered, like, what kinds of stories did your mom tell you, like, share with you about what it was like to grow up in Jessup, aside from like kind of the interesting family history?
That is one area. One area that I'm personally curious about is very early on in the one-to-one. She mentioned that she was reading about DART and working with congregations, and that was something that really attracted her. And also she mentioned that she, Black History Month was really a big, important part of her church. So do you think that's an area you'd like to explore, what the church life meant to her and working with congregations means to her?
Yeah, I was wondering that too. I mean, so you grew up in the church, like, what was the church important to your growing up? How was it important to your growing up?
Yeah, it was important. So my dad is a retired pastor now. And but we never were members of a church that he pastored.
What does that
Uh,
mean?
I know that sounds funny, right? So my dad was an ordained United Church of Christ pastor,
Okay.
which is a predominantly white,
Yeah.
denomination. So he would pastor. So there was no. I don't think there was a United Methodist congregation in Jessup at all. So certainly not a predominantly black congregation that he would be assigned to, or brought into. So he pastored churches in cities around Jessup, Brunswick, Georgia, Savannah, Georgia, Midway, Georgia. And we attended my mom's AME congregation in town, the church that she grew up in, Mount Moriah. But we would go and visit my dad's church. So we were in church a lot, different churches. And that was my mom's church that she grew up in. And so it was very important that we were active in there. So I was a part of the young people's department. The YPD is what they call it in the AME church. Church was a big part of our lives.
Uh-huh.
Church was a big part of our lives. Yes, so it was important.
Did that influence kind of like your desire to be part of DART? You did mention that, like, that it was organizing congregations, and you said this is what I'm supposed to do. Did it grow out of that experience of church?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, initially my attraction to justice work was being able to work with congregations. At the time, I was thinking churches. I was not thinking beyond, the Christian church at the time. Not that I was opposed to it, but that was my worldview.
Right.
And because all my life, I feel like my dad would tell me that I was going to be a minister.
Hmm.
And so, whether consciously or unconsciously, when I saw in that email working with congregations, it was like I was felt called, like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do.
Mhm.
Oh, and this is how I'll do it. Because pastoring um, never really appealed to me. The idea of pastoring and having a church. I think I just preaching every Sunday just didn't sound like fun. but
Well, you've
but
gotten, this is really good. The line of questioning, you've gotten Leah to talk about her experience growing up in church and her feeling of a calling to continue to do church work. You haven't really shared much of yourself, Marjorie, during this one-to-one. Is this an opportunity? Is this a place where you could connect with Leah around church work and start to build a relationship there too?
Um, sure, I think so. Actually, I was thinking when you were talking about um, being the daughter of a minister, and then going to your mom's church. I mean, this is just a small connection, but my children. So at one point, my husband is a priest,
okay.
and then at one point, I ran the Sunday school program. And
Hmm.
I was just imagining you as a child might have gotten sick of going around to all the all the different churches and so much Sunday
Yes.
school. My kids rebelled when I insisted that they not only like go to Sunday school on Sunday morning, but also I found this really cool um, catechesis program that I loved that they also went to on Tuesday afternoon. So they were like, really? We have to
Oh
go to
wow.
church, we have to go to Sunday school on Sunday, and we have to go to Sunday school on Tuesdays. Anyway, so I don't know.
I
I was,
I
I was,
really I was I identify with that. Like I don't remember going to church during the week too much, but I do remember at one point thinking, why do I have to get up every Sunday? Because I did church because my parents wanted me to, and I love God. I love Jesus. But the actual ritual of going to church
Mhm,
just was wearying to me because I didn't feel fully connected to it growing
mm,
up.
mhm. It was your parents' thing.
It
Yeah,
was my parents. It was what we did. Just like we
yeah,
we would sit down to
yeah,
dinner every night. That's what we
yeah,
do, right?
yeah. That I
I
totally
enjoyed
also.
that though.
Yeah, that's true. Well, and I grew up in a part. I mean, I grew up in Louisiana, and it was definitely in the time when I was growing up. It was going to church was just this is what you do on Sundays, like every Sunday,
Right.
like, and then Sunday dinner afterwards too, which was nice.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
That was the
Um,
fun part.
and I think for me, part of getting involved in Justice Knox definitely grew out of being part of the church. Like I'm also a lawyer in my background and had worked
Oh,
in
wow.
public interest law. So to me, it was cool to be able to combine kind of the
Mm,
work that I thought I was doing for justice as a lawyer with the work of the
mm.
church. I don't know. Was that something that was interesting to you to kind of bring the church into the work of justice? Because I don't think I saw my church as a very justice oriented church before.
Yeah, that's right. The extent of understanding the connection between church and justice was just around the stories of the civil rights movement, right, and Dr. King.
Mm,
And it never really occurred to me that that's how justice work could be, and I would argue should be, done. That's when
mhm,
it's at its best. I didn't think deeply about that because for the rest of the year, there was no connection between justice and our faith in sermons in Sunday school, in our YPD activities and going to annual conference. There was no connection.
mhm,
Um, so when I saw that again in the email and then heard about it in the, um, in that intro session that I attended there on campus, I it made sense. It just was nothing that it was like an epiphany. It's nothing that I'd ever really thought about before.
mhm,
Um, and at the same time, so for you, like sounds like with your public interest law that was like a connection too. But for me, it meant putting down the film camera. It meant that I was not
Right. Right.
going to do that.
So
Yeah.
this is a good time to stop. Our 20 minutes is up.
Okay.
Thank you,
Oh
Marjorie and
man,
Leah. I know, aren't one-to-ones kind of fun to get to
Went
know about
fast.
people?
they
Yeah.
are. They are.
All right, so now
Yeah.
we're gonna switch over to the evaluation. So if you can, in your packet, if you can go to page 54, we're going to kind of fill this form out together. So Marjorie, what self-interest do you think you uncovered for Leah during this one-to-one?
Well, definitely. I mean, she had like anger about community issues in
Okay.
college. Like that, I didn't really get to explore that a lot, but like just the anger of things being taken from other people, like hearing stories of the government taking things from people, and
Mm-hmm.
just kind of worried about gentrification in housing, like um
Yeah, and
and
sometimes
wanting to
when you
know
do a one-to-one,
what.
sometimes when you do a one-to-one, you start to uncover things that you want to come back to
Yeah.
in future conversations. And I would agree that there should be some more questions asked about that.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, related to that, like an interest in people's stories. I mean, she wanted to be a documentary filmmaker and go into
Mm,
Black neighborhoods and hear people's stories and their histories. And she talked a lot about her mom being the family historian and telling stories. So and really got excited talking about her own family's history. So I think um, an interest in knowing people's stories and who they are.
okay.
Yeah.
Did you hear any other self-interests?
Um, she definitely has a connection to the church. And I didn't really, I mean, and a wanting to, I didn't really get to explore this a lot either, but like kind of her dad wanting her to be a pastor, and then seeing
Mm-hmm.
kind of her work in Dart as being able to live out maybe a call in the church that maybe she didn't feel exactly called to. Um,
Yeah, do you remember the stories that it was a sort of a story that she told about what church was like, where the
right.
justice wasn't combined?
Yes, yes, the whole issue of
What
of
was that?
having kind of once a month, or I mean not once a month, but 1 month a year, or maybe 2 months, because there was a prep month in the choir too, of really getting excited about Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement, and then just sort of dropping that for the whole rest of the year. So it definitely is self-interest in combining justice into the work of the church.
Okay. And then I wrote down another self-interest about like the legacy of the civil rights movement and
Mhm.
identity of her Blackness with her parents. Leah, is that a self-interest of yours?
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's definitely a value for sure. Yeah.
Mhm.
So what
Big
stories
part of
did you
mine.
uncover, Marjorie, that support that self-interest?
Well, I mean, uh, that her dad organizing people to her dad organizing people to go to the March on Washington from Guilford, and also I think too just her mom's deep interest in her own family history, um,
Hmm.
maybe as a kind of a source of pride in who she is, and then also just being excited, the memories of being part of the choir with her brother, preparing for the Martin Luther King and day, and how exciting that was. Um, and I imagine there were more stories and things that were told around that time that I could have asked about. Um,
Okay. Well, let's look at some of the other evaluation questions. I'm flipping back to page 53 here in the workbook. So we already went over what the self-interests were and what were some of the stories. Were you able to uncover any of Leah's anger or values through this one-to-one?
I mean, I think I got some glimpses of her anger in the beginning, talking about the housing issues and that government taking things from people. And also, I think there was a little bit of anger at the end related to the church, and not, just all year long, like nothing else about that seemed so important. But I don't really think I got too deeply into her anger, but maybe little touches of it.
Okay. So yeah, I agree. Definitely touches of it. I mean, I think one of the things you could have done at the beginning, which I could have stopped you to ask you to do, is, she said gentrification makes me angry. Just like, why? Why does that make you angry?
Mm-hmm.
Would have been an interesting thing to ask early on. Or even sometimes in a one-to-one, you can ask like, well, how did that experience make you feel?
Mm.
To see if there are any anger or values related to that. So what were some of the questions that were useful in uncovering a deeper level of self-interest, Leah? What were some of the questions that you felt were useful?
I thought that, I thought that it was really great when Marge shared of herself about, how much she was involved with the church, or, her husband, she was a Sunday school teacher. But then when she shared about her kids kind of starting to rebel,
Mm,
that connected with my story so
Mm.
much. I didn't get to tell it, but, I went away from the church for a while. So
Mm.
that really connected with me. So I thought that that was really effective. And I thought that at the end, her just asking, is the church important to you?
yeah, that was good. Marjorie, any other questions that you thought were good for uncovering self-interests?
I don't know. I'm having a hard time actually remembering the questions that I ask at this point.
I mean, at one point in time, you just asked, well, what do you mean by that? You just asked her to re-explain something.
Mhm.
And that was really good. I think that's an important skill to have in a one-to-one. If you don't understand it, just ask.
Oh,
Could you?
innuendo. Yeah. That's when we start
Yeah,
to get into her
yeah,
family.
yeah, yeah. I think that was a good question to lift up in general. It didn't really 100% get at a
Right.
self-interest, but I think
Right.
that's a good question to use during one-to-ones.
Right.
I thought, at the beginning, when you originally asked, tell me something about yourself, and we evaluated that, and then you came back to, well, what got you interested in Dart? That was a
Mm-hmm.
good question.
Mm-hmm.
So you had some good questions in there, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
So which questions were not so helpful in your mind?
I mean, I maybe the question about where she's from and where her mom's
Mm,
from, and kind of just wanting to know about her story. I was just curious about. Um, that was probably, like you said, that was getting off to kind of her, like maybe not her self-interest, but just kind of general stories about her
mhm,
family, which are
mhm.
interesting to me, but maybe not uncovering her self-interest.
Yeah, very interesting. I mean, I kind of want to hear the end of that
I do
story,
too. Like, I'm dying to hear
I'll tell
about
you
Fanny
guys sometime.
Pearl.
but
It's
maybe not
very funny.
the best way to get at a self-interest.
Right.
Yeah.
So were there other areas that you could have explored more, or, when you're doing these one-to-ones, you want to be thinking about areas you want to continue to ask questions about, because this is an ongoing process of building a relationship. So you'll go back to doing one-to-ones with people. Like, what else do you want to know about Leah as far as her self-interests?
Well, I'm sure there are other areas. I mean, I guess there were just so many areas that we just touched on that I would want to go back and explore more,
Mm,
is kind of how I was feeling. Like, I wanted to hear like about, well, I didn't explore at all kind of her interest in filmmaking, but but to me it sort of seemed like her interest in stories and people's stories. I
mm,
wanted to learn more about that. Um,
Hmm.
I definitely, like she said a couple times that her mom had told a lot of stories. I wanted to hear more about her parents and their experiences in the civil rights movement, if they had any. I didn't know about that. And also, I was struck when I did say that about my kids, and you said, "Oh, that was the church of my parents." Like, you said that in a forceful way, and I did kind of want to explore
mm.
more about that. I didn't
Yeah.
quite know how at that point.
Mm.
But that definitely was curious to me.
Yeah.
And last question, do you feel like you started to build a relationship with Leah, and where did you find common ground?
I mean, I think I did. It was the beginning of a relationship.
Okay. What did you find common
Yeah.
ground along? We've already touched on it, but you found
I
common
think
ground
that
along the experience with children in the church.
children in the church, and also just some connection around wanting to do something with this justice stuff in the church. And I don't think I quite uncovered exactly where she was on that, but definitely that was an important part of my becoming an organizer, and I could see that that was important to her too. So building on that.
And I think, and maybe I kind of couched it wrong when we were doing the one-to-one, but we both realized that the career paths we had weren't doing exactly in justice what we wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
I put aside the camera, like I never got into it. And then what you had learned or what you had experienced, probably as a public interest lawyer, helped you to realize that
Yep.
this isn't it. Like it's
Right.
got to be
Yeah.
something else.
That wasn't sad. I mean,
So
not
that was,
satisfying, not effective. Yeah. I got to do something different. Yep.
yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Well, good job, Marjorie. I thought, you were clearly curious about Leah, and you kept, eye contact as much as you could over Zoom, and we're not afraid to delve in deeper. So good job.
Okay.
Yeah. So, okay. Facilitators who are watching this video, I'm going to step outside. The model is now over. And what I want to do is just take a moment to evaluate and kind of talk a little bit about Sarah as the facilitator, right? Because again, that is going to be you. You are going to be guiding the conversation and then walking the group through the evaluation questions for the last 10 minutes to evaluate how they did and what they uncovered during the one-to-one. So just a few tips and things to think about. One, again, interrupt early and often to set the tone. So you see that, Sarah interrupted as soon as the one-to-one got started. Marjorie asked, so tell me a little bit about yourself. That is going to happen in your group, even though you're going to state it in the introductions. It is very likely that that's going to happen at some point in your group. So just kind of be ready to interrupt early. And I would also give you advice if the very first question that gets asked is a good question, such as, hey, Leah, where are you from? Interrupt and say, Marge, what are you trying to learn with that question? Just do it. Just go ahead and interrupt, even if it's a good question, to set the tone and to hear what the person is thinking, and then let them ask that question again, or let the person answer the question. So even if it's a good question, go ahead and interrupt early, interrupt often. When interrupting, ask open-ended questions, and you saw that Sarah did that. She said, I'm going to go ahead and interrupt right now. What do you want to learn with that question, Marjorie? And then she redirected Marjorie. So in particular, when I started talking about my family and all of the lore and how the family got started, she was like, what are you trying to learn with that? Is that going to get deeper into Leah's self-interest? Marjorie was like, well, I was just kind of curious. And then Sarah said, why don't you ask a question that's specifically about Leah? What could you ask? What could you ask is an open-ended question to get Marjorie thinking about something that she had heard and something she could go back to. So make sure you ask open-ended questions when you interrupt. And if they get stuck, so we didn't necessarily see that, Marge was kind of rolling along, but if they stop and say, I don't know what to ask next, or if they just stop and there's silence, go ahead and jump in and help out. So those are a few tips. I also say don't be scared to interrupt. That is your job. You're going to let them know in your introduction. And don't be afraid to interrupt multiple times. Sarah, do you know how many times you interrupted? Do you have a count or a sense of that?
I feel like I interrupted between 4 to 6 times.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
I will say, as the facilitator, it is hard to interrupt, and you've just got to do it. I even felt that tension as somebody who's been doing this and prepped to do this with people I know very well. So you just have to do it, because that is the only way that the people in your group are going to think critically and learn about how to do a good one-to-one.
Yeah, and just do it. I mean, I noticed that, and I don't remember which question it was, but Marge asked a question. I started to answer, and then Sarah, you interrupted because you realized, oh no, that's right. I think you needed a moment to really think about what you heard.
Mm-hmm.
That's fine, right? That was completely fine. And I stopped, right? Because I'm in this group too, and I've heard that it's going to be interrupted. And I know that Sarah is teaching that skill. So then I stopped and I let Sarah do the interrupting. Um, so again, don't be scared to interrupt. You know, people don't mind if you're interrupting. It's better than feeling stuck. Um, you know, you don't want people to stick to the surface level. Um, and you want to, it's confirming, you want to confirm the thoughts that they have. So even if, like I said, if they're asking a good question and you interrupt, confirm their thoughts. That's fine. You are teaching this skill. You're the teacher. And so you want to go ahead and interrupt. And again, Sarah interrupted kind of early on, because it sounded like Marjorie was kind of getting into gentrification and affordable housing kind of question. Like, how did you learn about this? How did you learn about gentrification? And while that might be a question to ask at some point, but during a one-to-one, that wasn't really going to get into who I am and my values and what's important to me. So you definitely want to interrupt when the person conducting the one-to-one is starting to focus in on issue work or the work of the organization. The point is not for you to do the one-to-one, but to help guide them in finding deeper questions. And so when you interrupt, make sure you get the person back on track, but you as the facilitator, don't keep talking, you know, and don't you ask the question, you know. Sarah would always kick it back over to Marjorie. She even said, okay, Marge, go ahead and ask Leah that question. Now that you and I have huddled and kind of talked about what you should ask, Marge, go ahead and answer that question. And a pitfall is saying, you should not say as the facilitator, well, what you should have asked was, that's off-putting. Again, I think if you just keep using the language, I'm going to interrupt here. What are you trying to learn with this question? That's really good, kind of supportive and directive language. And make sure, you know, a possible pitfall for you also, that you don't want to fall into, facilitator, is going over time. Sarah even said, okay, I've got a timer set for 20 minutes. Use your cell phone, use whatever you use, but make sure you set that timer for 20 minutes. And then for the evaluation, make sure you set your timer for 10 minutes so that you can keep on time. So we don't want to fall into those pitfalls. Again, a few last tips. You're going to read through the one-on-one facilitator packet no fewer than twice, so read through that at least twice before the conference. We say study it, right? There's lots of details in there, guidance and tips that will shape your understanding of your role. And I want to make sure I also point this out. I want to share this screen again in the facilitator tips. Let's see, sorry. In the facilitator tips, where is it? Right here, facilitator instructions. Let me reshare my screen, guys, sorry. There we go. So after all of these instructions, then these are the one-on-one recording sheets. It would be easier if you kind of printed these out for yourself. Sarah was keeping track of the questions that Marge asked. So under here, so she put Marge's name right here as the first person leading the one-to-one, and she led it with Leah. And then she would write down Marge's questions and how I would respond. That helped Sarah keep track of where to interrupt as well. And if, what these responses were, I'm sure, Sarah, you probably have some kind of shorthand, a few words that you would put. And Sarah would know that, okay, cool, that's a story, that's some self-interest, her dad being a preacher, and then, not hearing justice in the church. Like, she's jotting down notes under my name on what my response is. And that helped Sarah to then lead. So there's like a page and a half space for you to be able to do that. And then that helps Sarah to lead the evaluation with these evaluation questions at the end. Okay, so again, that tip is about you reading through the packet and becoming really familiar with it, because that is your packet as the facilitator. After you read through the packet, call your organizer immediately if you have any questions. No question is a stupid question, just ask. Don't wait until the conference to ask questions. Because you're taking on this leadership role, it's important that you are informed and that you're comfortable and that you understand what's going to happen in your practice group before the Justice Ministry Conference. We also need you to read the pre-reading Why Stories Matter by Marshall Gans. So get from your organizer a pre-reading packet if you haven't already. And that story, that article is on pages 7 through 10. Please read that before the Justice Ministry Conference. And lastly, read over the agenda for the Justice Ministry Conference and become familiar with it. You should get that from your organizer as well. It's not in your workbook. That's going to be a separate document. Please get the agenda for the Justice Ministry Conference from your organizer. And again, if you have any questions at all, ask your organizer. So those are my closing tips. Anything else, Sarah?
Oh, thank you, Leah.
All right. Ask your organizer if you have any questions, and thanks, guys, for being a facilitator. Take care.